In supply chain management, there are many methods to ensure the supply chain is efficient, responsive, and sustainable. This lecture gives real-life examples in supply chain methods used by the Seeds of Success program run by Community Action Duluth in Duluth, Minnesota. Hello everyone, I am Jaden Evanson, a Climate Impact Corps AmeriCorps member working here at the Institute on the Environment at the University of Minnesota Duluth. We invite you to use the Institute on the Environment at UMD's Sustainability Portal tool to identify local sustainability-related resources, including faculty, research papers and projects, UMD courses, and student and community organizations. This link can be found on our website, ione.d.umn.edu. I would like to take a moment to read the university's land acknowledgement to remember the past and recognize the impact on those who continue to be affected. We collectively acknowledge that the University of Minnesota Duluth is located on the traditional, ancestral, and contemporary lands of Indigenous people. The university resides on land that was cared for and called home by the Ojibwe people, before them the Dakota and Northern Cheyenne people, and other Native peoples from time immemorial. Ceded by the Ojibwe in an 1854 treaty, this land holds great historical, spiritual, and personal significance for its original stewards, the Native nations and people of this region. We recognize and continually support and advocate for the sovereignty of the Native nations in this territory and beyond. By offering the land acknowledgement, we affirm tribal sovereignty and will work to hold the University of Minnesota Duluth accountable to American Indian peoples and nations. Tonight we will hear from Kayla Pridmore about Community Action Duluth's Seeds of Success program, which works to provide access to healthy, fresh foods for low-income individuals in Duluth. Welcome, Kayla.
Hi everybody, my name is Kayla Pridmore. I'm the Seeds of Success Community Action Duluth Food Access Program Manager, which means I get to do a lot of fun stuff. I'm going to tell you a little bit about our program overall, and then I'm going to get into what supply chain means in our teeny tiny version of a grocery store, our community mobile market. So as you can see up here, we have a few programs going on. We run two of the farmers markets in town, the Central Hillside Farmers Market, the Lincoln Park Farmers Market, and we also run one of the only produce prescription programs in the north. Through a USDA GusNIP grant, we are able to provide patients at Essentia who are both at risk of a diet-related health condition and report food worry, $80 per month to spend at our mobile and farmers markets. We are in the middle of cohort 2 right now. This has meant enormous buying power for people who might otherwise have less than $80 a month to spend on food. So we've really seen an increase in people coming to the markets to spend money on fruits and veggies, which their prescription is good for. The farmers markets will kick off this June and then they go through the end of September. We are able to leverage some federal funds to match people's EBT purchases, so people who are already on a limited income can come and use their EBT dollars. Up until some recent funding kerfuffles in the federal government, we were able to match $15 and get $40 to spend at the markets. We'll see how that pans out this summer, but that program has grown exponentially in the 3 years I've been with the program, and it has really helped people stretch their grocery budgets as food costs have increased. We also hustle to fund a Power of Produce program, which is funded through local banks, healthcare institutions. Anyone over 60 or under 18 always gets $4 to spend on fruits and veggies through the Power of Produce program. We're also very lucky to steward one of the only deep winter greenhouses in Minnesota. As you know, we have a challenging growing climate here in Duluth. So there's been a lot of efforts towards urban farming, urban growing, school gardens. But particularly with school gardens, it can be hard to overlap when things are in season and when students are in school. So we're lucky to steward this space outside of Denfeld High School, where we grow food year round. This year we've grown over 200 pounds of lettuce, which is quite impressive when you think about the volume of lettuce. This morning we just harvested 20 pounds, which is probably one of our last harvests because it is so well insulated and so well built that as soon as it gets above like 40, 50 degrees outside, it'll be like 100 degrees in that greenhouse. It's completely passive, solar, and we're using it now to get our tomato and pepper starts for all the growing we do outside at that site. And finally, the thing I'm going to talk about most this evening is the community mobile market. So the community mobile market is a grocery store on wheels, we like to say. This was our original vehicle, the trusty van. We recently invested in a mini low-floor bus that we are installing freezers and a fridge in so that folks can just board the bus. It's low floor, so people with mobility aids can get on. They can board the bus and then they do their shopping. Right now the way it works is that we are constantly loading in and out of this van into senior centers, community spaces, outside of schools, really anywhere people ask for us to pop up. We try our best to be there. We hold a pretty reliable schedule. We're in many of the same places, like week to week, month to month. Here's an example of our schedule. So we try and be places so people can come to rely on us. You'll see we're in a lot of neighborhoods that otherwise lack grocery stores. Duluth has really interesting geography, unique geography, and we're one of the least dense metros in the country, actually, which makes it really challenging for small footprint grocery stores, which find challenges in every part of the country to survive because of the nature of grocery margins. It's even harder in Duluth because we're not dense. There isn't necessarily the people to support a local neighborhood grocery store, which has meant the hollowing out a lot of these neighborhoods that no longer have access to some food resources. So we are a small part of the solution for some of these neighborhoods, like Gary New Duluth, which many of those folks have to drive 10, 15 miles to get to a grocery store. And lots of folks in these neighborhoods, because they are low income and have been historically left out, don't have access to transportation. So we show up in a couple of ways. We'll pop up, like I mentioned, loading and unloading out of that van into community centers where folks can come and do their shopping. We also offer delivery. Delivery is particularly helpful for some of our homebound seniors, but we also deliver to a lot of young families, moms at home with their kids, and a lot of our produce prescription folks who may have physical limitations that makes it hard for them to get out to markets. Will deliver directly to their homes. We do have to limit that by zip code. I get calls every day from people who are outside of our delivery zone looking for this resource. Unfortunately, because we are such a small team, we really have to limit it just for efficiency of our delivery route so that we can continue to serve as many people as we can in a day. But hopefully, with the addition of our bus and striving towards sustainability of this program without the fluctuations of grant funding, we'll be expanding our delivery zone to serve more folks, because even though we think of neighborhoods like Central Hillside and Lincoln Park as where poverty exists in Duluth, it's everywhere, and there's people who need food resources who aren't getting it across the city. This is our website, so this is just the top. As you can see at the side there, we really try and offer a whole diet grocery store. You're gonna find proteins and canned goods, but we really do focus on produce because that can be some of the hardest stuff to find in these food apartheid areas where folks are maybe going to Quick Trip to get their groceries, or relying on EBT, and we can use, when people use their EBT card, they can get $10 in free fruits and veggies, thanks to a federal program that is promoting the healthier diets for folks who are using their EBT cards. So you'll see there's quite a bit of variety up here. We've got over 100 different unique products, which represents quite a challenge in terms of inventory control, quality control. So we are constantly refining how we do things and where these products are coming from. You'll also see that we have an Imperfect Produce pack, which is quite popular with our folks. This is something that we instituted to help reduce food waste. Food comes to us from our many different sources, and it's not always perfect, or it doesn't have the shelf life that we hoped it would have. So folks can purchase this Imperfect Produce pack for $5, but they get a $10 value in produce that might just need like a little extra knife cut, or maybe you want to freeze it right away because it's not going to have the shelf life in your fridge. So that's one of the ways that we've been trying to reduce waste and reduce our shrink, which is all of the food that like wouldn't be sold because it was stolen, or it went out of date faster than we wanted it to, or it came in not looking that great. And shrink is like the greatest enemy of groceries. It's because margins are so slim in food, you really have to do everything you can to reduce that shrink. So through handling things quickly, by having a lot of turnover, by making sure that you have like diverse end users, so that folks looking for different things, folks who can, sometimes I end up with 2 cases of collard greens at the end of the week, folks who could use those 2 cases of collard greens. So we've really worked to diversify our end users as well. So we have the folks who are coming to shop, who are coming to our pop-ups, we have our delivery folks, but then we've also started supplying food for some community feeding programs. So there is a program in Duluth called Food Forward, which does semi-prepared meals and then delivers to homebound folks. So they've been able to absorb some of our leftover food at the end of the week because they can get kind of creative about what they're making. So I did have 2 cases of collards last week left over, but they were able to purchase those collards at cost from us and turn that into a meal for folks that got delivered today. And actually they use our cooler and our van as part of their program, because there's a lot of overhead in these small projects, and when we can like collaborate to share our resources, we all get a lot further. So we're very, very lucky to work with programs like Food Forward, who can be an end user of some of this stuff, and also we can kind of coordinate to share resources, including people power, volunteers, that sort of thing. The mobile market was launched in part in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, but it was really, like I mentioned, a long-standing issue in Duluth of some neighborhoods just not having equitable access to healthy food. See that it has grown rapidly, and this is just sales. So we always try and meet people where they're at. If people come and they don't have enough money on their EBT card, or they just are out of money for the month, we are finding a way to make sure that they're not walking home empty-handed. So this represents sales, not our Power of Produce, our GusNIP produce prescription, or when we're just hooking people up. So the mobile market has grown significantly. Based on our first 3 months, we're expecting to see, actually I could probably bump that projection up even more, having just done March's data. We're growing really rapidly, and with that, we've found some economies of scale. We've been able to tap into like bigger wholesale markets, so we can buy from like bigger packs from bigger wholesalers. So we're getting cheaper prices on some of the stuff so that we can continue to offer our customers like at or below grocery store prices when they come to shop with us. In addition to that, there's been some other savings with scale. When we first started, when I inherited this program in 2022, folks were running to Aldi's, buying things and putting it on the truck. I said, that's nonsense, we have to cut this out. And being able to scale up to do things like buy from wholesalers, buy from local farmers who don't want to make the trip into town for $100 worth of produce, but will do it for $500 worth of produce, has really helped us accelerate quickly, despite being a very small team. There's only 2 of us, doing all the back-end work of applying for grants, doing all our grant reporting, doing all of our bookkeeping, and also jumping on and off the back of that truck all day. That's kind of what I have to say. I would love to answer questions.
You mentioned a collaboration where you share resources with other organizations, which positively impacts your balance sheet. What is your plan to continue this? How much do customers who have issues getting to the market pay for the grocery bundles?
Yeah, so continuing to work through these economies of scale is definitely a big part of like our sustainability plan. So we kind of have a sliding margin. It's based on our values, wanting to make sure that we're supporting our local farmers, that we have culturally appropriate food in the market. There's a lot of different factors that go into it, but we will do usually between a 5 and 15% margin on any one product, which leaves about 75% of our costs in terms of like our overhead and staff cost is grant funded. So we are a long way from being sustainable, and honestly, I'm not sure this model will ever get there. Some things are social goods and aren't necessarily going to achieve like economic sustainability in like the sense that we usually think about it. So while we're working on economies of scale and making sure that we're as efficient as possible and really like figuring out our margins, I don't know if we're ever going to get there. Yeah.
You said the majority of the operations relies on 2 people. Do you use external volunteers?
Yeah, absolutely. So we publish a couple different volunteer calendars. We have one that's mobile market focused and one that's farmers market and garden focused. So we do get like a fair number of volunteers, and we'll get a lot of people calling us that have like the food bank model in mind who want to come and like bag up beans and stuff for like 3 hours. There's like 30 of them. So we usually try and have some sort of project like that, like on the back burner, so we can offer it to, like Maurice's came and did that. They like bagged 500 pounds of carrots recently. So, yeah. And we also will actually have an intern from UMD this summer, and we currently have an intern from St. Scholastica. So when I say 2 people, that's like 2 paid full-time staff, but we do get a lot of help from the community, or else we just wouldn't be able to do it.
I think the mobile food market is a great program to help remote or underserved community members who cannot get to the store receive culturally relevant or traditional food. Knowing that it is harder to coordinate the supply chain and achieve efficiency, responsiveness, and sustainability when there are more steps in the process, and that the supply chain is not financially sustainable for partners or stakeholders who rely on external funds, how do we increase the reliability of equitable food access for everyone?
That's a big question. And I'm going to give kind of a simple answer. I always say that I shouldn't have a job. Like in an efficient working society, my job shouldn't exist. So much of my job is because people are not paid equitably. And there's so much wealth in this country, and it's not distributed equitably. So how deeply inefficient that we have to have this program in order to put a Band-Aid on a problem that shouldn't exist. It's not a particularly satisfying answer probably, but that's my answer. But I do think there's solutions, of course, locally, besides like pay equity, in terms of like increasing the number of farmers on the land, decreasing, like you said, the number of people in that chain that makes it complicated and can sometimes make it more expensive, environmentally, equitably, like all of the externalized costs in our food system that get put on the environment or on impoverished people in other parts of the world. So shortening that supply chain is certainly part of the answer. And like I said, we really try and prioritize local farms in our sourcing. We saw a great benefit of that in the last few months with the egg prices. We had been buying eggs for $4 a dozen from our farmer. That was quite a bit more expensive than people were used to paying. We heard some grumbling about it. We always had a lower cost option available for people, though many people preferred the local eggs and would pay that premium for them. But in the last few months, those $4 a dozen eggs became like quite attractive to people because our farmer didn't need to increase her prices. She wasn't getting the same price, like the same pressures. She wasn't dealing with illness, and she wasn't willing to price gouge, which is a lot of what's going on in the egg market. Yes.
I see the appeal of buying local to keep the supply chain shorter and more sustainable, but I feel like local goods are normally more expensive. For people who struggle financially, does that higher cost make it harder to produce more food and feed more people? Besides that egg example, is it actually cheaper to source things locally?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we've dealt with that in a couple of ways. A lot of our farmers at the scale that we need, there's a lot of like very tiny farms in and around Duluth. The scale that we need that can deliver those like $500,000, $2,000 deliveries to us can usually are at a scale where they can more closely match the grocery store prices than you're going to see some of the farmers at like the farmers market. And some of the premium that you see on food like that is because people are willing to pay for it. It's not necessarily like more expensive for that farmer to produce, though certainly there are like added costs for local small and organic producers. But we can get potatoes from our local farmer for like 95 cents a pound, where you're gonna see at the grocery store are from our wholesaler, maybe 85 cents. So we do absorb some of that cost in our margin, but it also has meant we've had consistent access to more products. We have an insane market for rutabagas because we serve so many elders. And it's not easy to find rutabagas from our wholesalers or in local grocery stores all the time. So being able to like meet some of those like cultural needs and to be able to store some of that local food. We're still selling local food from last season because some of these foods is like what our ancestors ate all winter long. So we're bringing that back in the form of rutabagas and beets and yeah. Yes.
What are some of the current hurdles to eradicating food deserts in Duluth through a community co-op or another store, specifically in areas like Gary New Duluth neighborhood?
Yeah, well, I don't think Duluth is like, though we definitely have unique challenges being as far north we are, like the density thing I mentioned, the kind of unique geography we have of being so stretched out and so hilly in some places. All those things aside, I don't think we're particularly unique. There's a lot of communities that have the same issue in terms of like the hollowing out of like smaller retail zones. And again, I'm gonna go back like way big, a la my pay equity answer, and like there needs to be enforcement of antitrust laws. Yeah, there's a reason we don't see smaller groceries. A lot of that has to do with not enforcing antitrust laws and companies like Walmart having enormous unfair advantages. So, but there are efforts to like start smaller grocery stores. One is opening up in Lincoln Park this summer, right on Superior Street. That is again supplemented by a nonprofit, and not entirely clear like what their sustainability model will be and if it will require like ongoing grant support or not. Likely, I think it probably will. So yeah, it's a big societal issue.
How do you ensure your products satisfy FDA standards?
So we don't buy anything that isn't like produced or processed like at a federal USDA level. So sometimes people want to sell us venison and that, or things that they've processed at home, and I have to very gently explain that while we appreciate it, we can't sell that kind of thing. That's a good question.
Is it illegal to sell venison in stores?
It's not necessarily illegal to sell it in stores, but it has to be processed at a USDA facility, which is hard to find and is actually probably part of the answer to your question back there about like why there isn't more kind of local food establishments, is that along with the hollowing out of retail zones, we've lost a lot of like community scale, medium scale food processors where you could do things like butcher, get things butchered, pasteurized milk. Like a lot of those facilities went away with like the gianting of agriculture in the 80s and 90s. We lost those like processing facilities. And there's been some effort by the USDA to bring them back. There's some funding to like start butchers and that sort of thing. But it's slow going. And now probably the funding no longer exists.
How does the program distribution timeline work? How does it benefit the stakeholders and increase the efficiency of the program?
So we receive deliveries all week long from our wholesalers, from our farmers, and we usually are able to turn that food around within about 24 hours. So especially with our local food and the food that we grow, like people are getting that food sometimes weeks or months sooner than they would get like the same product at the grocery store. We're always hearing from people like, oh my gosh, that lettuce lasted like weeks in my fridge. That's never happened. Are you guys magic? Like, no, it's just that much more fresh. So yeah, in terms of timeline, a big part of the game is just like constantly turning over and making sure that we're getting the timing right for when deliveries hit to when we're going to have a market. So last week with the snow, we were in trouble. We have short timelines with extremely sometimes fragile product, and even being delayed a day, some of our stuff was just not to the standard we would want it to be, and just the disruption in everybody's kind of mental timeline with it all was like, it was a big deal, and why I had 2 cases of collards to give to the Food Forward program at the end of the week.
How do you decide where to set up the mobile market?
Some of the sites were, I think, literally like picked out on GIS. Before my time, just like where's there not a grocery store, where are there high concentrations of folks who may not have access to transportation, and they just like narrowed it down and found somewhere willing to host the market. So some of our longer standing sites, like in Gary and downtown, that's true. Other sites are because people called us. Maybe a social worker called us or a community organizer and was like, we really need this in our neighborhood. And we get those calls almost weekly for a new apartment building or a school or someone who wants us to pop up, but we just don't have the staff capacity to meet that need.
What is the typical percentage of revenue received from grant funding?
About 75%. Yep. And that the other 25% is the margin that we're making on the food that we sell, but also like donations, people paying it forward, that sort of thing.
Do you still offer the mobile market in the winter?
Yep, we operate year-round, and in fact, I think you said that like people have a hard time getting out during the winter. We're busiest in January and February because we're serving a lot of people who have mobility issues, like physically, or don't have cars and struggle to get around when it's icy and snowy. So January and February have historically been our busiest months.
Do you have mobile visits for the Indigenous communities?
We have not left like the bounds of Duluth, but we have worked with AICHO on a few different projects and have offered like maple syrup and wild rice from Fond du Lac on the market at a like depressed price thanks to some grant funding to make sure that it was accessible to folks, urban folks looking for some of those culturally connected foods. Yeah. Though, and like I said, there's a lot of need outside of the zip codes that we serve, but have not been able to meet them yet.
Is there regulation specifying the area you can serve?
Good question. When you're grant funded, it can get really complicated because some grants are basing it off of zip codes that have been designated as food deserts. Other grants are basing it off of specific streets that they want to see served or specific ethnic populations. So we are cobbling together all the time, making sure that we are meeting our grant obligations, like going where the need is the greatest and we can have the greatest impact and achieve some of that efficiency, and just our capacity as a program. So, and yes, also, we have to maintain licenses with the Department of Agriculture and the state of Minnesota to be able to do some of this work, to food handling license, retail food handling licenses. All those licenses can also determine like the bounds of where we're allowed to work. So it's a patchwork of a lot of different things to make sure that we are meeting all of our obligations and staying legal.
You mentioned that sometimes you need to distribute food through a different channel because it no longer fits your standards. What do you do with the extra food?
Right now our biggest partner is Food Forward, who are doing like the partially prepared meal kits, because they can get so creative. If we have like a case of collards and like a few dozen bananas left over, and they can find ways to use that. We also have the Imperfect Produce pack, which is quite popular with folks. We sell quite a few of those a week. And then like kind of worst case scenario, which feels weird to say, but worst case scenario, it goes to the food shelf. So the food never gets thrown out. It always finds a home, but we kind of have like some priorities of where we would like to see it go to like recoup at least some of our cost.
Some grocery stores have a discount section for things that are expiring soon or do not fit customer expectations of shape or color. Do your mobile markets have sections to sell these imperfect goods?
So we do it in a couple of ways through like our Imperfect food pack, which is this guy with the spotty bananas, which you're right, they're perfectly good, but if we were to put them out with the nice looking bananas, they wouldn't sell. So people can order these ahead of time, and we'll know like about 24 hours in advance that we have 10 Imperfect Produce packs to pack tomorrow, so we'll know, okay, the 20 pounds of bananas that don't look good have a home tomorrow. But we also, yes, like discount things day of or moment to moment, like this is not going to hold on to our next market, or it's -30 outside and the bananas are really unhappy coming in and out of the van, like they're going to turn black, so have at them.
What food category is the most in demand or desired by your target market?
It's really interesting. That can vary quite a bit based on our different sites, but I would say like raspberries, berries at large are like the most popular item we sell, probably by, I don't know, 3-4-fold. They're really popular with kids and older adults, and they also usually fit within our $4 Power of Produce program, which is that free produce for kids and folks over 60. So a lot of folks will come and that's the first thing they'll pick out is what kind of berries they're getting with their free $4. And then we will go through like periods of folks not really going for something. Cucumbers don't really move at this time of year, even though the cucumbers that we have now are going to be from the same suppliers, the cucumbers we have in June. Like, they're the same. We see like seasonal eating, even though it doesn't really correlate. In June in Duluth, cucumbers are not actually in season, but people do have some like seasonal eating habits, which has been really interesting to observe. So it'll change over the course of the year.
How do you communicate with your suppliers? Do you send them emails with individual orders?
As much as possible, I'm trying not to do that. Yeah. So I have a standing order with almost all of our wholesale folks because I basically know, and we've set it up such that we kind of need the same thing every single week. So I just have a standing order. So that shows up Monday mornings. I don't even have to be there to click a button. But with our farmers, yes, it's a lot more of like calling someone sometimes at like 8 o'clock at night, like, hey, we need this for tomorrow. And
how does demand change due to seasonal habits and food quality? Does shelf life impact the level of demand for produce?
Yes, for the most part, yes. Though in the summer, my standing orders will change for like the month and a half that we have tomatoes in Duluth. My standing order will kind of flip to be more of like only raspberries and trying to think of bananas, stuff that we just aren't going to be able to get locally, and then we prioritize that local buying. So my life gets very, very busy and much more complicated, like end of July through October, because I'm doing a lot more coordinating with like a dozen farmers who I can only deliver Wednesday at 7 a.m. and it turns out I didn't have as many carrots as I thought I did, and like doing all those coordinating and managing all those little relationships. Which we do because the quality is miles better than we're going to get from our wholesalers. There's some grant funding that supports making sure that we're ordering locally. And our customers really, for the most part, prefer some of those local foods. So we're making the sacrifice of all of that extra coordination to meet some values and satisfy some customer demand.
My friends from food deserts in the Twin Cities often do not know how to prepare fresh food. Do you offer resources or recipes to help people learn to cook?
There's a few things we do. We work really closely with that group that I mentioned that does the semi-prepared meals. They have generated all sorts of recipes. They even have cooking videos you can go watch on their Instagram, which are very cute. So we coordinate with them to offer some of those resources to our customers, and they're obviously using stuff that we have available in the store. So I'm very excited to see what they did with all those collard greens so that we can pass that on to our customers. We also offer cooking classes at our sites. So we have a combination of just community members who come and say, I really like making this thing. Can I make it? We'll buy the ingredients, they make it. And then we also have SNAP Ed educators. So there's folks employed by the state of Minnesota to do nutrition education specifically for people who receive EBT. So they'll every summer come and do a series on, what do we do when cucumbers are in season and we have hundreds of them, what do we do with cucumbers? But you're spot on. And not only is it what do I do with it, but do I have a vegetable peeler or pots and pans or a sufficient knife. So we've heard that a lot from our customers. And actually, if you come to one of our sites and you need something like that, we have a box of kitchen equipment. Because you're not going to be able to eat all this good food if you aren't adequately prepared. But again, it comes down to a lot of people are not paid enough and don't have enough time to do the kind of preparing that I think we'd all like to be able to do for our nutrition. So we have started integrating more convenience foods into the market. So more canned soups. We get these rice bowls. People just need to microwave. We even have frozen pizzas. And these are all things that I don't advertise with our funders and don't put at the top when I'm telling the story about the mobile market, but it is the reality for people. And for some of the folks we serve don't have kitchens because they're transitioning out of homelessness and they're living in hotels, that sort of thing. So we try and meet people where they're at and make sure that there's a food that everybody can eat.
Do you support your local suppliers through consumer education?
So the example I can think of is the eggs we get locally are brown, and the eggs we get from Aldi's are white. So yes, every day I have conversations about the difference between these eggs. And in this case, while largely there's not really a difference between brown and white eggs, in this case there is a difference because these chickens are eating this and they're in Hermantown, and these chickens are eating this and we don't know where they're from. So yes, to some extent, we're offering some education. There is an enormous amount of conversation around seasonality, especially, of course, since we also run the farmers markets and people show up at our first markets in June expecting cucumbers and tomatoes, and educating folks and helping farmers having those conversations about hold your horses, not quite yet, we're too far north.
What led you to start this initiative/business?
So the mobile market really grew out of the COVID-19 pandemic, both because people were struggling even more than they were beforehand to get out to grocery stores, and of course, volatility in people's employment status, all of the challenges that came with the pandemic led to issues, of course, with finding enough food to eat, which were compounding existing issues that we've talked about in terms of people's barriers to access in Duluth. And frankly, there was also a lot of grant money available during the pandemic for things like food access. So a lot of our seed funding for getting our first vehicle, getting our walk-in cooler set up, that was all funded by the Build Back Better and some ARPA funds that allowed us to kind of get this started.
What is your top piece of advice for someone going into business or supply chain management? If you were to tell someone how to create or transition to a sustainable supply chain, what would you say?
So before I did this work, I ran a vegetable farm for a decade. So having run a business, what's my one piece of advice? Take care of yourself. Don't forget about yourself. The diversity is key, like in all aspects. You can't come to rely on one supplier or one way of doing things and build your whole business or life around that. Like, you have to constantly be looking for new ways to do things, for new partners, and you have to work them in ways that feel like organic and true to your business. So yeah, I guess diversifying, keeping your eyes open, that's what I would recommend.